Hi, welcome back to the reading of Wish as we get into reading chapter 9 and, 10 and 11 today. When I got home, I told Gus and Bertha about Howard's plan to catch Wishbone. We're going to build a great big trap, I said, stretching my arms out to show how big, with chicken wire from his daddy's workshop. Gus's eyebrows shot up. A trap, huh? I nodded. Well, kind of more like one of those big dog crates. We're going to put it out on the edge of the woods beside the garden shed, and then we're going to stick branches and leaves and stuff in the chicken wire so it blends in. I went to explain how we're going to put something good to eat inside the crate. When Wishbone went to eat it, we closed the door. He likes meatloaf, Bertha said, and hot dogs and bologna. She tossed a couple of pieces of fish sticks left over from supper on the floor for two of the cats. Now, I don't want to rain on your parade, Charlie, but what if that dog isn't friendly to people? What if he bites? What if he has some kind of dog disease? He won't bite. He likes me, I said, ignoring the question about the dog disease. Gus, Bertha said, tell Charlie about the dog you had when you were a kid. And then she went on and told me about Gus's name. Gus's dog's name was Skeeter, who used to catch rabbits and bring them home for Gus and his sisters to play with. And one time he climbed in the back of the produce truck and ended up all the way in Hendersonville, and showed up on the front porch the next day full of porcupine quills. Right, Gus? Gus nodded. Right. And then one time he dug up a hornet's nest, Bertha said. That dog must have had 9 lives, like a cat must have, Gus said. Tell her about how he waited for you outside of school every day. Bertha scooped one of the cats into her lap. Oh, and tell her about how he used to steal chicken livers right out of the frying pan. We're gonna bore this child to death, Bertie, he said, winking at me. Right, Butterbean? Gus had started calling me Butterbean sometimes. It made me feel like a baby, but I didn't say anything. Then Bertha told us about some woman in the grocery store who fainted in the cereal aisle, but I wasn't really listening because I was thinking about Wishbone. I pictured him waiting at school for me every day. Then he'd run along beside the school bus like he'd done that day I saw him fighting. Maybe the bus driver would let him on the bus because he's so smart and would do tricks for all the kids. He'd sleep in my bed every single night, and I'd sing them good old Noah to him. He'd let me put Jackie's Riley High School t-shirt on him and maybe even paint his toenails red. I'd teach him to go up to the end of the driveway on Sunday mornings and get the newspaper before church. He'd chase rabbits out of the garden and sit on the porch with us every night. I still had a little niggle about Mama having a hissy fit when I brought him back to Riley with me, but I pushed that aside. By the time Bertha went inside to get the box of graham crackers for us, I was so in love with Wishbone, couldn't hardly stand it. I sure hope Howard's plan worked. Let's go set up the sprinkler in the garden, Gus said to me, tugging on his dirty baseball cap. I followed him outside with 3 cats sauntering along beside us. I helped him untangle the hose and drag it out to the garden while he attached the sprinkler to it. I walked up and down the tidy rows of pole beans and squash and tomato plants growing bigger every day. The soft dirt was warm under my bare feet. Suddenly, a ladybug landed on my arm. I put my finger next to it and let it climb on. Then I held my finger up and whispered, Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home. As I watched that little ladybug fly off to the sky, I made my wish. Jackie called again that night. She told me she had put those blue streaks in her hair and now everybody at school was copying her. I swear, Charlie, she said, everybody in Raleigh's got blue streaks in their hair. Then she told me She met some boy who played guitar in a band and had his nose pierced. His name was Cockroach, and her sort of kind of boyfriend, Arlo, didn't like him. Cockroach, I said, because what else can you say to that? But she just kept on talking. She couldn't wait to graduate and kiss that school goodbye. She and some girl named Shayla might move to Fort Lauderdale if Shayla's uncle could get them jobs in his Mexican restaurant. But if that didn't happen, she might go to school to be a dental assistant. She sure had a lot of plans, but it seemed like none of them included me. Are you going to come visit me sometime? I asked in a tiny voice that sounded like a baby. Of course I am, Charlie, she said, soon as I get time. I guess she had lots of time for Cockroach, but not much time for me. Out on the porch that night, Bertha told Gus about her day while I sent my thoughts zipping through the trees to wherever Wishbone was. I wanted him to know he didn't have to be a stray like me. I wanted him to be mine. Then my mind wandered to the Odoms. I wondered what they were doing right that very minute. I bet they were all piled on pillows on the floor eating popcorn and playing Crazy Eights. I bet Mrs. Odom was taping their school papers up on the wall and telling them how proud she was of them. Then she'd have to say rutabaga so Cotton would stop drawing on the walls with markers. Gus interrupted my thoughts when he stood up and stretched and said, "Time to turn in." I hated the thought of another day at school. That awful bus with gum on the seats and kids snickering when I walked by, Mrs. Willoughby frowning at me and tossing my marked up papers onto my desk with a sigh. The cafeteria with kids flinging peas at each other and ignoring me. There were only a few more weeks of school left, but it felt like 100 years to me. There was no doubt about it. I needed Wishbone more than ever. Chapter 11. The next day at school, it seemed like the clock had stopped and the day was stuck in a never-ending torture of math and social studies and gym. Even lunch and recess were in slow motion. Finally, the dismissal bell rang, and I hightailed it to the bus. I plopped down in my usual spot and waited for Howard. He must have been taking his own sweet time because the seats were starting to fill up. The next thing I knew, Audrey Mitchell was making her way up the aisle, cutting her eyes from side to side, searching for a seat. Couldn't believe when she sat next to me, propping her backpack between us so she wouldn't catch any of my cooties. "You can't sit here," I said. She made an ugly face at me and said, "Yes, I can." "No, you can't," I sorta hollered. She flinched a little and gaped at me. "You can't save seats," she said. "That's the rule." Pineapple, pineapple, pineapple. But Howard's dumb trick didn't work because the next thing I knew, I had shoved her right off the seat and into the aisle. The minute I did it, I regretted it. Everybody liked Audrey. Ought to be bringing her candy bars and telling her how nice her hair looked instead of shoving her onto the dirty bus floor. Luckily, Audrey didn't have a temper like me and Scrappy. All she did was yelp a little bit, dust herself off, call me crazy, and move to another seat. By the time Howard finally got there, my temper had settled down from a boil to a simmer. He dropped into the seat next to me. "What you fired up about now?" he asked. I looked out the window so he couldn't see my still red face. "I'm not fired up," I said. He pushed his glasses up on his nose and went, "Huh?" Then he dug around in his backpack and pulled out half a cheese sandwich. He took the cheese out, rolled it into a ball, and popped it into his mouth. Then he did the same with the bread, rolling it into doughy balls. As the bus made its way through the streets of Colby, I thought about the trap we were going to make to catch Wishbone, and my simmering anger disappeared. In its place was a swirl of excitement. When we got to Howard's, Mrs. Odom was on the porch with Cotton, smiling and waving to the bus driver. Howard, Dwight, and me sat on the porch steps while she asked about our day. Did Mrs. Willoughby finally get that window fan fixed? Was Dwight's math test hard? Did the PTA sell cupcakes in the cafeteria again? Then Howard whipped some papers out of his backpack and thrust them at her, grinning. Ta-da! He said. She made such a fuss over those papers, you'd have thought they were made of pure gold. I could practically feel my marked up papers jammed into the bottom of my backpack, weighing heavy on my lap. I wish I had a good one, so I could say ta-da too. Howard didn't really need to be my backpack buddy anymore, since I knew my way around school and I definitely knew the rules. Instead, he kept offering to help me with some of my schoolwork. I always said no, 'cause what was the use? I wasn't even going to be at that school much longer, I reminded him. His face would droop and he'd say, you never know, you might be. I ignored that and stuffed my sorry-looking papers into my backpack like I didn't even care one bit. But sitting on the porch with Mrs. Odom, I sort of wished I had let him help me some. After we had banana pudding for a snack, me and Howard went straight back to the ramshackle garage behind the house. I swear that garage looked like it was going to fall right over, tilting sideways with the door hanging off one hinge. We stepped inside and Howard's daddy looked up from his workbench in the corner. When he stood up, I thought his head was going to go right through the ceiling. He was so tall. He had great big freckled hands and fiery red hair and twinkling blue eyes. He smelled like grass and sawdust and gasoline all mixed together. Hey there, he said, and his big booming voice bounced around like little garage, practically shaking the saws and shovels right off the walls. I seen him at church, mopping his sweaty face with his handkerchief, while he belted out, when the roll is called up yonder, but I never talked to him. While most folks were drinking coffee and chit-chatting in the fellowship hall, Mr. Odom and some of the other men were outside inspecting each other's truck engines or watching teenagers play basketball in the parking lot. Well, look at you, he said to me. You know, you are the spitting image of your mama. My mama? I hadn't expected that. I am? I asked. You sure are. Look just like her. You mean Bertha? I said. Nah, Carla, he said. Your mama. You know her? You know her? Don't really know her, he said. Only seen her a time or two. In Riley, you mean? Nah, up yonder at Gus and Bertha's. He brushed soft sawdust off at the front of his shirt. Seems like just yesterday, but I reckon it wasn't, he said. Oh, was all I can think of to say, but my mind was racing. When had Mama been at Gus and Bertha's? How come nobody's ever told me that? Old Howie here has been talking about you nonstop, he said, winking at Howard. I felt my cheeks burn. Then Mr. Odom said, so, y'all gonna catch that mangy old hound, are you? Yes, sir. That mutt's a rascal. I could tell you that. Been chased away from every chicken coop and garbage can in Colby. His name is Wishbone, Howard said. Mr. Odom chuckled. Well, that's a fine name. He likes me, I said. Charlie's gonna keep him, Howard said. But we have to catch him first. So Mr. Odom showed us how to staple chicken wire to wood and how to screw on hinges for a door. And before long, we had a trap perfect for catching a dog. When Burl got home from his job pumping gas, he helped us load the trap onto the back of his truck and drove us to Gus and Bertha's. My thoughts kept flitting around all over the place, sometimes thinking about Wishbone and sometimes thinking about Mama being up there at Gus and Bertha's. But Burl played the radio so loud none of my flinting thoughts had a chance to settle down in one place. When we got to Gus and Bertha's, we set the trap up over by the bushes at the edge of the yard. While me and Howard gathered leaves and branches to stick through the chicken wire, Bertha kept Burl busy with her questions. Did he think his mama would like some pickled okra from the garden when it was ready? Was Lenny still in the marching band? Had his grandmama had the hip surgery yet? Burl said, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, ma'am. Finally, and Howard finished, and I swear you couldn't hardly even see the trap nestled there in the bushes. I ran inside the house and got the pie tin of table scraps I'd been saving, a piece of bacon, a biscuit, some tuna noodle casserole. I pushed the pie tin away, way back into the corner of the trap and said, okay, now all we have to do is wait. Tune in next time as I read chapter 12.